Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. I'm very happy to welcome all of you remotely and those of you in the room to our special episode. We're calling it a Summer of Broadband here in Utah. And we're going to do multiple other episodes. For example, next Wednesday, and by the way, today is Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. A week from now, July 20th, we're going to be doing our Summer of Broadband with representatives from Indiana, the head of the Office of Broadband, and others who work with the head of broadband in Indiana. But today, I'm happy to be back in Utah, where I lived for several years, and to introduce a really wonderful panel of experts who are all on the Broadband Alliance and who are going to be able to speak to the role of broadband and the role of effectively, coordinating the role that the state can play in facilitating improved broadband capabilities in a state. We hope we're going to have a wider view, but for the moment, I will introduce our panelists just now. But first, I want to give a shout out to the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast. We're very happy to thank each of them who participate and make these programs possible. I should point out that one of our longest running sponsors is Utopia Fiber, which is based right here in Utah, the Utah Telecommunications Open Infrastructure Agency. And they are just a really up the capacity here in the state of Utah. We're also happy to welcome for the first time a new sponsor, Google Fiber. Google Fiber is also quite active here in Utah, as well as many other states. Additional sponsors besides Utopia and Google Fiber include Broadband.money, Broadband Now, Lightbox, Ookla, Pinpoint Capital Advisors, Powerhouse Management, Bitstream, Positron Access, Samsung Electronics America, and the California Emerging Technology Fund. We thank each of the sponsors for being part of our program and contributing to make it such a great week after week occurrence. In fact, we've been doing this for 2.5 years now, since the start of the pandemic. And now that the pandemic is waning, in spite of new variants that pop up here and again, we've been out and doing Broadband Breakfast Live online on the road. In fact, I've been in Louisiana at the Wireless Internet Service Providers Conference, in Texas at Broadband Communities, in Tennessee at Fiber Connect, and in Colorado at Mountain Connect. And now we're doing some more shows on the road here. So let's go ahead and turn to our panel. Like I said, I hope we'll get a little wider view, but for now, we do still have a great group of people. I want to introduce each of them, and then I'll turn to our host here, Rebecca Dill. Rebecca is the head of the Broadband Office here in Utah. Her official title, if I can get it right, Rebecca, because sometimes it varies, right? It's worked through different iterations, and I think that what you're going to be doing, and I should say thank you so much for hosting us here at the World Trade Center in Salt Lake, across the street from Temple Square. And in about an hour from now, hour and a half from now, you have a meeting here. And so you've been so gracious to kind of let us come here in advance of your meeting here. Rebecca Dill is the director of the Utah Broadband Center, and it is within the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. And you facilitate connecting households and businesses across the state to high-speed internet. Rebecca, let's go ahead and give you a chance to speak a little bit briefly here about what you do and what this group is that is going to be here with us, but also in the other larger room in an hour and a half.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Welcome back. We're glad to have you back here in Utah. We have kept up our relationship and kept in touch and watching Broadband Breakfast. So we really appreciate this opportunity for you to be here and for us to join you. Yes, and on a busy day, we have quarterly meetings of our Utah Broadband Alliance. And so he's picked a very busy morning for me. And so I had to be sure and bring some support staff, and not my staff, but this is definitely support. Utah has just really been at the forefront of broadband and for years. So our meeting this morning, as I said, the Utah Broadband Alliance, if anybody wants to join us in an hour and a half, you can go to help me out.
Broadband.utah.gov.
Yes, broadband.utah.gov. I had it just a minute ago, and broadband.utah.gov, and right there, look up Utah Broadband Alliance,
Right.
and you can register and get the Zoom link, because we do a hybrid meeting. So we're going to be in person. We have a huge group. I'm expecting probably 50 in person today, and maybe close to that virtually, of providers, internet service providers, state agencies, local governments, nonprofits, anybody and everyone that has an interest of broadband in Utah.
Yeah. Well, and Rebecca, we were just chatting beforehand, there was what I sometimes called round one of these state broadband efforts when the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was around. And I was one of these people in your positions. I was in the state of Illinois and ran the state program during those years. But when the funding for that program came to an end in 2013, 2014, many states, in fact, I think it's a majority of states, dropped their broadband offices. Utah did not. Utah kept it. He kept going. Typically thought of as a red state, not wanting to spend money on programs. Utah, the Utah legislature continued to support and have this office here. And of course, having lived in Utah, I've been to this meeting many times, and it is really an impressive gathering that you have, a very substantive group that will be here in an hour and change. So look forward to joining that. Let me go ahead and introduce the rest of our panel who is here with us, and then we'll turn to each of them in turn. We have, to Rebecca's right, James Toledo. James is a member of the Navajo Nation, and you are I guess Salt Clan, can I call that?
Yes.
Born for Tangle Clan, and I look forward to hearing about your role as the program manager for the Utah Division of Indian Affairs. And tribal broadband is getting a lot of attention right now. I do believe, having followed this issue closely for at least 15, maybe 20 years, tribal broadband has always been kind of out there, but there's a real push, I feel, and a lot of funding too. But I know there are huge challenges. So we'll look forward to hearing your perspectives on tribal broadband. Next to James is Liz Gavitas, and Liz coordinates digital equity work in Utah for the Utah State Library, particularly the Digital Access and Education Program there. So Liz, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to hearing about the Utah State Library. Kelly Cole. Hello, Kelly. Kelly has had many facets and roles, and we interacted because you were in this role here in Utah as the Utah Broadband Officer. Now you are the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Utah Education and Telehealth Network. And UETN is just an incredible resource. I mean, I hope you'll tell us more about what UEN or UETN, I never know what the branding is, but it's been a truly a leader in state educational networks. So welcome, Kelly. Thanks for being here with us. And I know you brought a colleague.
Introduce Jeff Egley.
Please do. Yes.
Okay, so this is my colleague, Jeff Egley, and he's actually going to be an extreme asset to the tribal conversation, I think, because he's been working on a pretty intense project down on the Navajo Nation right now. And he is, I hope I get your title correctly, Associate Director of Technical Services.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so he is on our technical side, working with districts, making sure that they have all of the broadband infrastructure that they need throughout the state. So he's very key in helping them get connected. And what else do you want to say about it?
I think, that working with higher ed, K-12, libraries, now, past number of years, also hospital and clinics, to see really fiber-based broadband introduced to all of those locations around the state, serving over 1,800 locations now throughout Utah.
Okay. Well, let's turn back to Rebecca for another moment. Tell us a little bit about Rebecca in this moment, on our program, Broadband Breakfast Live Online, we've had many guests speak about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and IIJA passed just over 8 months ago, just shy of 8 months. It is a landmark piece of legislation. It passed with very bipartisan support, 69-30 in the Senate, and it provides $65 billion for broadband. 42.5 billion are going through the NTIA's BEAD program, which, again, acronym alert, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Act. Why I'm going through all this is because you, Rebecca Dill, as the state broadband officer, are going to be responsible for a large chunk of those monies when they go to Utah. So how does that make you feel?
Not underwhelmed. So to put it interestingly enough, yesterday our executive director mentioned in our town hall meeting with all of the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, all the offices mentioned that this is the largest amount of money that will be going through this office. And we do economic development, we do business incentives of all kinds, but this is the largest chunk of money that will be coming through the office.
So before IIJA came along, you were still doing a lot of these activities. Now that IIJA is here, how has that changed your workflow? How does that change your consultations with this advisory group, this alliance that we'll be meeting here in an hour?
That's a good question. The alliance has been ongoing. I think it's always been very productive. It's been we've been conveners, we've been able to share resources. I think it's always been very active that way. As far as the IIJA, for us, I think it's just finishing up those donut holes across the state that are still there. And we don't really have any huge gaps, I would say, but we have a lot of smaller ones across the state. And this will be an opportunity here now to all come together, to get to sit to the table together and I be able to use our resources like the Division of Indian Affairs and specifically find where these are. Yeah.
Well, so you mentioned a term, donut holes, that I want to get you to define. But I think it'd be really good, particularly since this is effectively the kickoff of our series, Summer of Broadband. We did do one last week with Ohio, some officials in Ohio who talked about their digital equity planning grant. And I did a program through West Virginia on my way out here to Utah. But this is really the first full scale where we're sitting down with the state broadband officer and friends. What is Utah like? Tell us a little bit about the state of broadband here in the Beehive State.
Okay. Well, like I said, Utah has been at the forefront of broadband. My predecessors, as you mentioned, Kelly Cole is one of them, and others before me were very proactive in working with the providers. They are the ones that actually formed this alliance. And for us to have internet service providers, competitors, all come together in the same room and to be able to talk about the needs of the state. They established this group as well as the broadband availability maps for residential areas. So we've had maps in place for probably a decade now and have been continuing to maintain and update them twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
We were one of the first of 8 states to participate with the MBAM maps.
The National Broadband Availability Map.
Yes,
of NTIA.
yes, because of our maps being as robust as they are. And so I feel like the efforts that have been done in the past have been a great foundation, and we're just moving forward. And now this is another opportunity for us to continue that great work.
Yeah.
The digital equity or the digital inclusion
Right.
is just an added piece to it. This is something that we've had a grassroots group that's been trying to get things going over the past since 2018.
Yeah.
And so this now provides funding for that. So that is a big plus.
Absolutely. You also mentioned donut holes. And so
Okay.
I wanted to get you to define a donut hole, because I guess you're talking really about rural areas, right? What do you mean by a donut hole?
I'm talking about the entire state.
Okay.
So donut holes, even in the urban areas. So our rural providers, yes, they have been great. And they've been very, again, proactive, going after the USDA Reconnect
Right.
grants and the CAF and various, using the Universal Service Fund. But those donut holes are kind of more of the outlying areas, whereas the donut holes I also speak of are in some of the urban areas. So where we have antiquated technologies that are there, and
like DSL
yeah.
is being, and the donut hole, I presume, would be the area around, like maybe an urban core is served, but there's areas around that aren't. Is that the concept?
Right. Mhm.
Well, great. Let's go to James, and James, tell us just a little bit about the division. Is it the Division of Indian Affairs?
Yes.
Of and is it in the Department of Commerce as well, or is it in a different department?
We're in a different department, so we're part of the Utah Department of Cultural and Community Engagement. And so my office is the Utah Division of Indian Affairs, and really our role is to serve as liaisons between state government and tribal government. So we work with the 8 tribes here in Utah, really just sharing information, grants, opportunities. We also host meetings, what we call Utah Tribal Leaders Meetings. So we host these meetings 6 times a year, and it gives state agencies an opportunity to provide updates about projects that they're working on, or even just any other funding opportunities that may be out there, just to share information with the tribes. And also gives tribal leadership an opportunity to hear these updates and to ask questions and to inquire further, and maybe set up additional meetings from these meetings that we do.
What are the 8 tribes in Utah?
So we have 8 tribes here. We have the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation, which is north of Salt Lake City. West of Salt Lake City, we have 2 Goshute tribes. We have the Confederated Tribes of Goshute, as well as the Skull Valley Band of Goshute. West or east of Salt Lake City, we have the Ute Indian tribe of the UTAN Reservation. And then south of Salt Lake City, we have the Paiute Indian tribe of Utah. They're comprised of 5 different bands that spans into several different counties in southwestern Utah. We have the San Juan Southern Paiute tribe, which is has communities in Utah and northern Arizona. Also the Navajo Nation, which spans 3 states. So the southeastern corner of Utah into Arizona and New Mexico. And then we have the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, which also is in southeastern Utah. So there's a small community where just south of Blanding, Utah, and then their larger reservation is located in southwestern Colorado.
Are there any particular tribes that leap to mind that have done a good job recently tackling broadband, or maybe have experienced challenges? Have you had any interactions with one or more of those lately that have been able to address some of the difficulty in getting broadband on tribal reservations?
Yeah, I would say the Navajo Nation is probably by far the most active. So they're a large tribe, which I'm a member of, and so the tribal government is structured similarly to the federal government system. So there's just 3 branches of governments. They have their own economic development office, and they have their own utilities company, which UTAN has partnered and worked on with expanding broadband down into the Navajo Nation. I think when you're talking about challenges, right-of-ways, getting approvals for that process generally takes a lot of time. There's a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy that people have to go through, both on the tribal government side as well as the federal government side. So it has a tendency to prolong projects, than the typical timeline that a provider would be used to doing. So working in on tribal lands, it does take a lot more time, and that's kind of where my office would step in, if just again to help in the communication and sharing of information, or getting in contact with the appropriate person to help expedite those processes best as we can.
Do other states with federally recognized Indian tribes have a person in your position, kind of a broadband coordinator for tribal governments?
A lot of states do have an Indian Affairs office, which their structures, will vary depending on how it's set up. But in many cases, those offices do help in facilitating communication or helping, state agencies or federal agencies work with partner tribes.
Last question before I go down to the next guest is, what is your view of IIJA? What do you see from, again, your perspective, helping tribal broadband? How does IIJA kind of help contribute to that?
Well, from the feedback that I've received, I think a lot of tribal governments are happy that they are being noticed and that resources are being allocated for tribal broadband. It is an opportunity for tribes to, enter the digital age, with remote work and, a lot of remote work, or even just opportunities for entrepreneurs to access the market. And so I think having the emphasis and resources given to tribal broadband is something that's very much welcomed. And it's not enough to fill the gap, but the fact that tribes are included in the process and are given a significant amount of resources, is much welcome.
There was $1 billion in tribal funding for broadband prior to IIJA, and IIJA put in an additional $2 billion that hasn't yet been there's not yet been a notice of funding on that, but we know that's coming. We know there's going to be even more resources than there have been. Liz, tell us a little bit about the Utah State Library and its role in getting broadband capability.
Sure. So the State Library Division, we're as the state agency for Utah and for our libraries, we are able to be the go-between with federal funding and with national trends to help sort of guide the work that our libraries are doing, but also let them be the experts on their community and do the work that's most appropriate for their own area, their own geography. As far as broadband, libraries are a very critical anchor institution, obviously, and so that's where UTAN largely comes in, not us so much. But we are excited to help facilitate that relationship a little bit and make sure that resource is being utilized fully. I think that's an important role that the state library plays, at least in Utah. Mm-hmm. We also, we feel like libraries are the foundation of digital equity in Utah. And so when we look at that last piece of broadband access and broadband equity, it's how are people finding value in their home internet subscription? How are they finding opportunities that are available through the digital world? And that's where libraries can come in. Our job is to connect people with information and with resources. And what better information resource than the internet? Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular role that Utah State Library is playing in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or what's the role that libraries have at this moment on the federal broadband programs?
So in a lot of states, the state library agencies have been asked to take a leadership role on the Digital Equity Act. And so right now we're looking at the Digital Equity Planning Grant, and shortly we'll be looking at the Digital Equity Capacity Grant. So we were really excited to get to work closely with the Broadband Center on Utah's application and our plan for how we're going to approach that plan for our state and also those funds in the coming years. While the Broadband Center is still the administrating entity for those funds, we were able to take a great leadership role. And I think that's largely because of the expertise that our individual libraries have as people who have been serving digital equity needs for decades now.
Okay. Well, I suspect in fact, I think you've had a program at the Salt Lake Library about 2 years ago. I remember the libraries have been very involved in Utah, without a doubt. Anything you'd like to add about sort of this group, the Broadband Center, or the role that the libraries in the state have played in digital equity?
Yeah, so one of our strengths as a state, I think, is that our individual libraries are empowered to act on what's most appropriate for their area, to take ownership over their community's digital access needs, and then to create solutions for those. And so that was what we saw with the Salt Lake City Public Library, and you're referring to the Digital Navigators program,
right, which
was a nationwide pilot. It's really exciting to see that has become kind of the blueprint for a lot of those digital equity services in other states. And that foundational work that the Salt Lake City Public Library was able to do, I think it shined a light on how our libraries are trailblazers, but also how unique solutions can be developed for each different situation. And being able to share that information is a big piece of why the Broadband Alliance is very, very helpful. And why I think it's such a critical piece to how our state approaches digital equity on a unified level.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you again for being with us on this discussion here. Let's kind of turn. I'm going to sort of adjust my screen a little bit so we can get Kelly and Jeff into the picture. Let's step back a bit and tell us about UEN or UETN. What's the origin of this organization? Tell us just a bit about how you've made a difference for broadband in the state of Utah.
Okay, that's a big question. So your question about UEN versus UETN. So we were UEN for a very long time. And about probably about 8 or 9 years ago,
Right, yep.
the Utah State Legislature decided to merge the Utah Telehealth Network with the Utah Education Network, thus the T in UETN.
Legislature seems to do that a lot.
Yeah.
They kind of come in
Yeah.
and mess in everyone's business.
So maybe I'll give an overview of what we do, and then Jeff, do you have a good history
Yeah,
overview?
glad to, yeah.
I bet you're better at the history part of it. Jeff's been there longer than I have by far. So UETN has several areas of focus. I would say our main areas of focus, we have the infrastructure piece that we're very well known for.
Right.
So we have a statewide network that connects schools, like Liz said, libraries, certain healthcare organizations, essentially community anchor institutions throughout the state. And so we are the E-rate applicant for the state of Utah. So we do the category 1 applications, then we also assist schools and other groups with category 2 applications. So we help them to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And we have expertise in-house that can help them apply for E-rate and all of those good things that are really important. And then I would say our second area is the tools. So we do consortium applications for software for the schools and for higher education. So we have a really good relationship with both the Utah Board of Education and also the Board of Higher Education. And so if those institutions are finding that they're all using similar software products, then we at times have stepped in and done a large consortium application for them to be able to take advantage of bulk discounts for the school. So we actually help to reduce costs in a lot of cases. So as far as the tools, equipment on the ground, we have conferencing capabilities for the schools. We have an IVC network where you can have a school teaching a class in one part of the state and students participating in another part. So we have a very extensive network of conferencing capabilities. And then we also do professional development. So we have a large professional development team that works with our educators, helping them learn whether it's Canvas or Nearpod or any of the software tools that I've talked about. We have a team that actually helps those teachers be able to use the technology in the classroom. So we're in many different areas. And then we also, I bet a lot of people that know us for broadband don't realize that we also operate a public television station. So the N, when you talk about the network can mean the television network, it can mean the pipes in the ground, the broadband network. It's the network that we have, the relationships that we have. So I think that our acronym means a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And Jeff, maybe you can do the history.
Yeah, on the history side, kind of quickly, late 80s, early 90s, really, we started building out a network for distance education first, with fiber going into high schools, going into university and college campuses, and then building out microwave to rural Utah. And then we started introducing T1s, DS3s, broadband into those schools as that connectivity was established. And we started seeing commodity internet come along. And so really starting out with distance ed and then building out a network where now distance ed is one of the applications that rides on the network. And so we've gone from a SONA-based network of T1s and DS3s to 1, 10, 100 gig. We'll see an introduction of 400 gigs soon with internet to the network. And so we've seen quite a transition over the years of what we've been able to do to build that. And so I think doing this early with education was a huge benefit. And so we're able to build this piece by piece over the years. And I think that was an important element to making this possible, to be able to connect higher ed, K-12, which is fairly unique across the United States, working with both of them, then working with libraries, and now working with clinics and hospitals.
So Kelly and Jeff, what is unique or different about UEN or UETN from other research and educational networks? I mean, there's in fact, I think there's a kind of a quilt or something that is like a patchwork of these different R and E networks. What's different about what you guys do? I don't think there needs to be something different, but
Well, I would kind of go back to my earlier comment where many you'll see tied to universities and research, where we have universities research and we also have K-12 tied in there. And so now we have hospitals and clinics. And so the fact that we're supporting all of those on a statewide basis, they're all benefiting from the robust network connectivity we can provide, the connectivity in and out of the state we can provide, I think is fairly unique. There are some other examples, but I think that's probably really one of the things that defines us.
And then we're also adding those services on top of the network and like I said, the television station. We're in a lot of spaces that serve both higher ed and K-12. And so I feel like we just keep increasing the value that we're trying to add to our stakeholders.
Yeah, fully leveraging the network the best we can. And very, I would say one last thing, very public-private support. We leverage our local service providers. I think that's an important distinction. We work very closely with all of Utah service providers to do this. And so they win, we win. We work together to see broadband come into a community. We become an anchor. And I think that's a very important element, working with the providers.
Are you a state agency or are you a nonprofit?
We are with the state.
With the state.
We're an independent state agency and we're housed at the University of Utah.
Okay. All right. Since there's some interesting things there.
Yeah.
So yeah, but we have a great relationship with higher ed, and then being a state agency, there's actually a lot of great benefits to be able to do that. And we are statutorily, we are the entity that connects K-12 to the internet under statute. And then the libraries can opt into the network. Healthcare facilities can opt in. So UET, the telehealth part of it, we serve a lot of small nonprofit clinics and health centers throughout the state. And so we are meeting a need for some of these groups that are maybe smaller, and we're helping them apply for rural healthcare funds and helping with their technology needs. And so that's another space that we're very invested in as well.
Well, Kelly, just given your background, including your role as the Utah Broadband official, and now in your key role at UEN, what is your view of IIJA and how the Utah Education Network is going to help Utah entities play a role?
Yeah, so I actually have spent some time over the last week or two reading the BEAD funding. And
the 98-page NOFO.
I read it. And I think, as Rebecca was saying, this is a very large amount of money, and there's a lot of requirements with it. Just to give some scope, I was in the broadband office for 7 years, and I never managed a grant during that time. I was the person, and I think a lot of state broadband directors that were in place at the same time, there just was not funding coming in.
Right.
And so because of that, we had to rely on the relationships. We had to rely on best practices. But now I think that was such a good foundation now that there's money coming in, because I think we will use it well, because we've figured out how to do things with not very much. And now we can kind of really look at how do you help this issue. And with the BEAD funding in particular, you're tasked with first serving the unserved and then also the underserved. And so I would suspect Utah might be a little bit unique, that our unserved might be a bit smaller, and then we're going to have an underserved layer of that. And so I think that it's going to be a really interesting case for NTIA to look at. And I'm glad that we were able to keep mapping throughout the years. That was something that I think we fought to keep. And I think that we're in a really good position because we made that choice, because we're going to see the FCC maps come in, and the broadband maps that come in through Utah, they come directly from the providers to Rebecca in most cases. And if somebody on the ground is looking at the Utah broadband map and then they say, oh, well, this location isn't served, Rebecca can actually go in and work with the provider and refine those things. And so some of that refinement has already been done. But the BEAD money, it's a huge responsibility, because the states are being tasked with essentially solving the problem.
Yeah.
That's what they're being tasked with.
Unlike the last round, where it was more of a competitive grant at the federal level, here, the maps are basically going to determine how much each state gets based on its share of underserved. And then it goes to Rebecca, and you have to make a decision about what you're going to do with it. And I want to come back to something, we've bandied a couple of names around: Broadband Alliance, Broadband Center. Could you just give us the quick snapshot for what is the official name of the entity that you're in charge of, and then how do you relate to these stakeholders here, as well as I gather some new stakeholders that you've been assigned?
Okay. Utah Broadband Center.
Okay.
So, and then we have also the Utah Broadband Alliance. That committee or council has been ongoing for all of these years. This year, the legislators formed another commission, and this is like an oversight commission, and that is called the Utah Broadband Center Advisory Commission. So this is a couple of representatives, a couple of state senators, and some public agencies that will help as we formulate the plan, and they will bring together the stakeholders, get input from them, and help guide the plan, this 5-year plan that the state needs and is required through BEAD. It was mentioned the state, or the Salt Lake City Library, and their efforts through this digital navigation navigator, but also Utah Communities Connect. Now here's one nonprofit, or just now being formed as a nonprofit. It was a volunteer organization of many entities to address this digital inclusion, digital equity. And this has been comprised of various state agencies, including everyone that's here and others. And this is an ongoing effort, and this will be very helpful in that regard. As far as other organizations, we have the United Way, we have just so many other AARP, retired people, American Association of Retired People, and other agencies like that, and nonprofits who have just been working with us very closely and have been very helpful in our efforts.
Do you know who the representatives and senators and public agencies are that are?
I do. If you want to come to the meeting, you're going to find out all of their names.
And not just me, but all of you and others who are watching who want to come. We already have a link to the Utah Broadband Center on the website for this page. So go there, sign up, and attend less than an hour from now, and hear about them. Just to recap that point, though, you've already put in your letter of intent. Utah is one of the, I think it was 48 when I checked yesterday, 48 states that have said yes. They have until next Monday to say yes, that we want to participate in the BEAD program. And then as soon as the federal government kind of approves that, let me back up. Then you have another deadline. Is it August 15th? Is that correct, Rebecca?
So the digital equity one was this week.
That's right.
We met that one. And then August 15th is for the BEAD planning.
Speak just a minute or so about what you need to do for that August 15th BEAD planning.
It's a high level budgeting, what we're planning to do, a narrative. We are planning to use this funding we have an RFP out right now for a consultant. That will close July 29th. I know a lot of the states are doing this, and we're going to use some of those funds for this consultant to help us formulate this 5-year plan. So that will include outreach. We're going to be doing on the ground through the libraries. We actually have already started some town hall or open houses to survey people and their adoption and access and availability. And this will be ongoing.
And so once you submit that August 15th, the NTIA will approve it, or they'll come back to you and say, hey, we need to change this. But once they approve it, then
they'll say, this is great. But they said they need to give us at least 2 months before we find out. And then we will get this funding. And then once we receive this funding, then we have 270 days or 9 months to finish and submit or have a 5-year plan in place.
That's what I was going to, the 5-year plan.
Right.
And that's what this advisory commission is, to basically oversee that plan.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you're expecting that plan will include?
Well, it'll probably include a lot of things we already have in our plan, and working with these organizations, working with the tribes. I think that's really important. How we can identify like the adoption. I think, as Kelly said, Utah doesn't have a huge unserved population, which I'm, estimating is less than 50,000 across the state. Underserved is about twice that much. But also the adoption is not as high as we'd like to see it here. The Affordable Connectivity Program, we have pushed this out. We have our own website to direct people to local resources for this and worked with our various agencies. I feel like that's another area though that we want to be able to get the word out better, and hopefully that these messaging and that will go out will be able to reach this population of people who are unserved because of affordability.
Right. The affordability piece. So we've got about 15 minutes left. If you've got questions, please ask them. That is to say, if you're on Zoom and you've got questions, if you're on other platforms, it's probably easier to put on Zoom just to minimize the multitasking on my part. One great question here we've got from Scott Lemke. He writes, I have been in Utah for 38 years now. I see that if a city doesn't have fiber, they are going to be left behind. Ogden, where I live, doesn't have fiber. I think there's two types of donut hole, tech challenges and fiber challenge. I'll let Rebecca task that, but maybe others would like to address this. Maybe we should call it the fiber haves or don't haves, right? What are your thoughts on that question?
And that is a good question. And we have heard from people from Ogden. And so working with the localities, that's what's really going to be key on this. It's like, we're state, we're big, and it's the local communities, people reaching out to their local councils, their elected officials, their people there, and then working with providers, incumbents that may be already in the area who with an incentive, as we see this grant program is an incentive to be able to add that infrastructure, whereas they otherwise couldn't pencil it, where there wouldn't be the return on investment, so to speak. They are business people, and we need to remember that. Our effort is to reach our citizens. So how we can make that work is we definitely need to work with our providers. We can't do it without them.
James, what do you think when you hear the word fiber to the home? Is that a technology that is talked about enough, or a lot, or none, with regard to reservations?
Well, I think within tribal communities, it is going to be, each community is uniquely different. For example, Navajo Nation, homes are located way off the grid. So having fiber to home, I think, would be wonderful, but looking at cost of running the fiber, the middle mile, or what it's called, to connect the home is going to become more of a challenge, just because of the distance of where the homes are located, versus other tribal communities where maybe they are more in a traditional neighborhood type setting, where you do have like a small neighborhood where you can easily connect them. So I think those challenges are going to vary from tribe to tribe.
Interesting. Others who want to answer this question about fiber and its role in the donut holes. I'm going to address that. Liz or Kelly?
Let's see. Well, I think that I think that one thing that I appreciated. I mean, I appreciated a lot of things in BEAD NOFO that came out, but that we are going to address underserved. And so that does give an opportunity for upgrades to services, because I think in Utah in particular, I think that we have a lot of households that are right at that 25 level that are not up to the 100. And being able to fund up to 100 megabits gives an opportunity to put in fiber and other technologies and be able to increase the speeds. And I think, I think really, like, the issue is speed, and however that comes about. And we know that fiber is scalable and able to, without question, get those speeds. But I think with this funding opportunity in particular, we'll be able to pick up some of those areas that maybe have some service, but once you start having many devices and several people working from home, I think there is an opportunity. And I do think that that, you know, in past programs, we haven't gotten up to that 100. And so it's good to see that they're pushing the speed number on what qualifies for the funding. And that's going to be really important in Utah, because we're going to have people that are going to fit in that unserved or underserved category.
Right. And you're referring, of course, to the definitions within the legislation itself, that unserved is not receiving the current FCC definition, which most people think is too slow, of 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits up. But IIJA added a new definition, underserved, 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up. And the statements that Alan Davidson, the NTIA administrator, have made seem to suggest that it'll almost be viewed as if it's unserved. Not exactly. I don't want to get them in too much hot water, but
if you look at it as a prioritization, right? So you have to pick up your unserved areas, and then you also have an opportunity for your underserved areas. So like the tribal communities and things, there's going to be opportunities for getting service to areas that haven't had it before, and the priority is going to be the unserved. But then there's also opportunity, because if you just said 25, it would be difficult to get those kinds of upgrades that this person is asking about.
Yeah, in most cases, if you're reaching the unserved, you're going through the underserved areas.
Right.
So
Excellent
you're going
point.
to be you're going to be picking it all up.
Right. So you're going to do a comprehensive plan where you're coordinating those efforts and making sure that it's going through and serving.
And that's where we want to work with the providers, because I know there's been kind of pushback and, well, we don't want to be overbuilt. Well, here's your opportunity, you know.
overbuild yourself.
Yeah, overbuild yourself.
Yeah.
We have another question here from Nathaniel Smith. Some areas in Utah have only mobile wireless coverage. Are those areas considered served, or will they be eligible for broadband service upgrades through B? We've kind of been talking a little bit
They're
about
not
that
considered
here.
served if it's mobile, is my understanding.
Yeah.
Right. Where satellite is not considered served.
I think that's satellite that's considered unserved, but mobile. Sorry, you are absolutely correct. It's fixed wireless that is not considered unserved, right? That is to say, but you're absolutely right that mobile. So you want to underscore that a little bit, the mobile versus fixed wireless distinction, Kelly?
Okay, so mobile is your cell phone service, so mobile device. So it would be the difference between a fixed wireless setup would be the provider has an antenna, what's the word, Joe? A tower, thank you. When you're being recorded, it's always harder to get your words out, unfortunately. So you have a tower, and then that tower, you would have an antenna on your home, and it goes directly to that antenna on your home. That spot that you're receiving the service is fixed, right? It's in the same
Wireless
spot.
internet service provider.
Yeah. Whereas if it's coming to your mobile device, if it's your cell tower, the device that's receiving the signal is mobile, that you can move around. So essentially, that's the best way. That's my layman's terms to describe it. Somebody else probably.
Well, I mean, the reality I gather, right? I mean, that there are a lot of places that you're not going to be able to get fiber to. 42.5 billion won't build fiber to the home for everyone, right? And you know.
Well, and another broader or more defined definition of this fixed wireless is getting fiber to the tower. So we have lots of towers across the rural areas. So if we can invest in the middle mile that's getting the fiber to the tower, that's going to expand the coverage and the capabilities of the number of and increase the speeds, improve the latency of the households that may right now be unserved because it's just a wireless tower as opposed to a fixed tower. And then
introducing fiber to a community, then what you are doing, you're getting fiber to the tower. Also, you're providing a landing point, a foundation to build out. If it's a challenge to do that last mile, then you may have a wireless internet service provider then that can take advantage of that. But getting that fiber into that community then sets the foundation to be able to improve that broadband, all those services, whether it's mobile, fixed, and where possible, direct fiber into the residents, the business, the hospital.
I'd like to toss something else in here. Also, one of our guests that was not able to attend, Lynn Yocum, who's the
Right.
fiber optics manager with our Utah Department of Transportation. So for the last 20 years, been very proactive in getting fiber optics along our freeways and interstates, highways. She's there. Utah is a model. For the
Oh,
rest of the
and Lynn
country.
is a real national treasure. I
Yes,
mean, in
she
terms of
is.
what she's done for
Yeah.
getting that kind of middle mile fiber
Right.
through these Utah transportation
So
rights of way.
And if we're talking about IIJA, we've got
Right.
the middle mile grant. And so just to let you know, the state of Utah is putting together a grant application,
Are
working
you
with,
sure you want to tip off your competitors?
working with the providers. And I just know we are going to be winners.
No, and I'm looking forward to the meeting here in a half an hour to learn more about it. Hopefully Lynn will be there. I want to come back to the mapping question. We've got about 5 minutes here left, and what several people have mentioned mapping. You mentioned that Utah never dropped its mapping program. Are you concerned that the FCC maps will be reliable or unreliable? How important will Utah's state broadband map be to check against the federal broadband map? Rebecca or others who'd like to weigh in.
So as I'm learning a little bit more and more about the FCC maps and the challenge process, so a lot of what the states are going to be sharing or challenging is actual locations. It's not necessarily the speeds that are
Right.
there at that location, but these are actual locations. So if we look at our maps and say, hey, we're missing locations here, and these are our places, I am very confident. We have a wonderful Utah Geospatial Resource Center, GIS department, and our maps are very robust. But like the FCC, our maps are reliant on provider submissions. So that's based on the accuracy of what is submitted. So we are also internally, the state is doing a speed test campaign,
Okay.
speedtest.utah.gov. We'd like everyone across the state to participate. It's ongoing. This will help us based on whatever the funding ends up being. We will actually be able to direct where it goes. That's the thing that's unique about this. That even though the FCC map will say, well, this is how many unserved areas you have, they're not telling us where or how to use these funds, but that will be up to us, and that we will be able to rely on our maps, our data, and working with our providers and our communities. I'm confident that what the FCC is putting together is going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
Can I
Anyone
add
else?
one
Please
more
go ahead,
comment?
Kelly. Yeah.
Another advantage I think that we have in Utah, another thing that we did with the mapping is so when the original broadband programs were happening through NTIA, some of the states had the opportunity, or some of the states applied for funding to do address points. And that's something that we've also continued. And so I think it's just as important to know you have to know where locations are, right?
Yeah.
And so you can look at the whole state, but if you don't know where those homes are, then you don't know where you're actually trying to serve. And we actually have a really good database of where actual homes are, like pinpoints. If you look on the Utah map, there's a layer and you can click on it. And so you can look at the state and then okay, there's no service here, but there's no addresses there either. And so I think Rebecca has an advantage of being able to her team can actually look at that layer. And I think they update it every 6 months as well, the address points. The counties help them to update the address points. And so, yeah, you're able to see where the buildings are that aren't served, which is just as important as knowing like areas of the state. And we have a lot of federal land. We have a lot of areas of the state where there aren't homes, there aren't necessarily points that you would connect. But being able to see where people are living is really key to this. And especially when you have a donut hole problem and you have a town and then there's a couple houses right there.
Right.
And that we can access those houses really quickly and we know where they are.
So one word we haven't mentioned to my knowledge in this conversation is COVID, the pandemic. Obviously, it's hopefully and predominantly in the rearview mirror. We started this program because of that, a way to keep our communities together. I want to invite all of you to make closing statements just about Utah's broadband efforts. But if you have any thoughts on how the pandemic has affected the way we look at broadband, either in terms of your organizations or the communities you serve. Let's go kind of from right to left, and then we'll close out with Rebecca. Go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple different examples. We saw students roll home, and we changed and adjusted to that to ensure that there's a way for them to continue with their education from the home into the districts and the higher ed in the classroom. And so we met that challenge, I think, extremely well as a state and with our partners. We saw the providers identify locations that weren't connected. They connected those homes. They did whatever they could to make sure that every student could connect. The challenges, COVID presented a real challenge. And when we're working with our provider, with White Mesa, the Mountain Ute Tribe, and with the Navajo Nation, there's times when places were closed down, government was shut down. And so that stops and slows down the ability to do all the permitting and all the work that's necessary. The tribal work and permitting has some unique qualities. There's allotments. You need to be able to meet people and get signatures, and all of that slowed down to a snail's pace at times. And so that impacts the timeline, and we have constraints we have to work within as do the providers to get this done based on the funding that we're working off of, which is primarily E-rate. And so, the pandemic presented some real challenges. We continued to work, the providers continued to work, we continued to turn up schools, but we did fill that.
Yeah. Kelly, final thoughts here.
Yeah, like Jeff said, I mean, Utah, we were back in online within a few days, which is crazy because I know some states it was a lot longer than that. But I think another interesting role that we ended up taking on during the initial phase of the coronavirus pandemic was the CARES funding that came to the states. And so we worked with partners in the room on projects to get whether it was software or devices or whatever it was, and both higher ed and K-12. At one point, I was sort of overseeing a chunk of CARES that came through UTAN. We had 250 projects going at the same time, and they were all throughout the state. And so we were able to get resources on the ground to libraries, to schools, to higher ed very quickly, and having an organization like UTAN with the partnerships in place, it was a lot easier to kind of be able to figure out what was needed and what was needed quickly. And we only had 6 months to implement things. So there were a lot of things at UTAN that shifted very quickly with the pandemic. Yeah. All of our teams, and like Jeff's team was installing wireless all over the state, major wireless investments throughout the state.
Access was a big issue. It did highlight where there were access challenges for students. Once they went home, it did shine a light on some of those challenges. Yeah, and the university campuses people being able to socially distance when they did come back, and both K-12 and higher ed, the needs were just very acute. And I think Utah, we do really well with our relationships and our partnerships, and that was key during the pandemic.
Liz, final thoughts you might have.
Yeah, well, one thing that we experience in Utah is wildfires. And I think that pre-pandemic, there was never a sense of, maintaining digital access during this state of emergency is going to be a priority here. I mean, I think it was very low on the list. Now that we have experienced the past few years, I think we are a lot more prepared for those emergency situations and for the kind of digital access that people need to keep in that situation. Because of the situation even. So I think that we're in a good place to start making some more sustainable or permanent changes to how we approach these emergency availability of broadband and of digital access support, because I think that will help our communities in any kind of emergency that we face in the future.
Thank you. James.
Yeah, and I guess just kind of leading off of what Kelly and Jeff mentioned, I think during the pandemic, it really did expose a lot of digital, where the gaps were, especially within tribal communities. But in the course of that, I was just struck by the community response, that the strong networking, the strong partnerships that have been built up over the years really came into action. San Juan School District would be a prime example where when they shifted to remote learning, a lot of the students did not have access at home. And so, solutions were to do mobile hotspots then that was determined that those ran out very quickly, the data plans and so forth. And so I think in some areas of the state, they relied on libraries. So libraries came in, stepped up and had access points to where, people could, drive to their local libraries to access, a more reliable internet signal to where they're able to do Wi-Fi and connect to a public Wi-Fi to continue their learning. So really, I think the silver lining in that is just the overall partnerships that were built up and cultivated over the years really came into action when the need was there.
Thank you, and thanks for being with us. Rebecca, final thoughts on
Yes.
The broadband moment for Utah.
Oh, so again, building upon this, fortunately, our legislators, I felt, stayed a step ahead. So when COVID hit, we had dialed back with the Utah Broadband Center, and it was not fully funded. They stepped up, they funded it fully, created this position that I'm in now full-time, and established a grant program. So before this IIJA money now is coming, we've actually had an opportunity to launch and to run a grant, the first for the state of Utah. And so I feel like we are prepared.
Yeah.
We're ready for this funding, and we're ready to find those last little gaps.
Well, thank you so much to Rebecca and to each of you for hosting us here. As a reminder, if you are interested in the Utah Broadband Alliance, Utah, I guess it's that's right, Utah Broadband Alliance. This group and more will be online in a half an hour, and you can again sign up to join. For those of you who are interested in other states, we'll be back next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time to talk about Indiana and Indiana's broadband efforts. On behalf of James, Kelly, Liz, James, and Jeff, Kelly, Liz, James, and Rebecca, I'm Drew Clark of Broadband Breakfast. We'll see you next week.